There is a myth that every game from the 80s and 90s was hard as hell, lacked continues, and used trial and error as the primary source of difficulty. Some tell me this is just the way it was back then, and classic games should be reviewed differently than modern games. Interestingly, I'm told modern games are more accommodating to newer players, and do a much better job appealing to a wider base of skill levels, because beginners deserve to have fun too. In short, modern games should be reviewed differently than classic games. Whenever I hear either of these viewpoints, I can't help but think of Super Mario Bros. The game's importance and legacy has been cemented into the history books, and long after we're all gone, it is sure to be the Citizen Kane of video games, so I certainly don't want to rehash what has been covered a million times since the advent of internet video. Yes, the designers did do an awesome job teaching the player the mechanics of a brand new genre through clever design and excellent item placement. The first Goomba teaches jumping, the question blocks invite exploration, and brick breaking is communicated to the player in a very obvious way. The control mechanics are still used by platformers to this very day. While I can't say for certain Mario introduced these platforming staples, it surely brought them into the forefront of gaming. Jumping is no longer on a fixed arc. Height and distance are now controlled by the player. The main goal of the game is no longer achieving a high score, but rather finishing the adventure. Collecting 100 widgets will reward an extra life. The action takes place on a scrolling plane rather than a static screen. It was all revolutionary at the time and marks the beginning of modern gaming as we know it today. It truly is impressive. However, there are other elements found in Super Mario Bros. I find even more impressive. I've spent a lot of time these past few years talking about controls, item and hazard placement, difficulty balance, boss battles, and power-ups in dozens of videos. My criticisms are often met with a strange mix of attacks, ranging from me not understanding how gaming was in the 80s or 90s, or having my head stuck in the 80s and 90s and not appreciating how gaming has progressed. First, trial and error was not the primary source of difficulty in many games. The first thing Super Mario Bros. Does well is always give the player a chance to dissect upcoming obstacles and determine a path forward. Enemies rarely move quickly, and patterns are simple enough to discern. Level design works in the same way. Super Mario Bros. Rarely requires blind jumps, and when the game asks the player to perform a leap of faith, danger is never lurking on the other side. Trial and error is thankfully absent. One thing that does feel dated though is the lack of continues. While I don't have footage of a game over, Super Mario Bros. Does not feature a continue system. If a player runs out of lives, they must restart at World 1-1. There is a cheat code to alleviate this issue. Holding A and pressing start at the title screen will allow a player to restart at the world they left off, but this trick is not found in the instruction manual, so I would consider it a cheat and not something an average player would be aware of. The trick is in the official Nintendo's player guide though, on page 31. I find it interesting the designers were at least thinking about unlimited continues, and I would be curious to know why they didn't just make this a default option. Of course, when the game was re-released as part of Super Mario All-Stars for the Super Nintendo in 1993, a battery save feature was added, giving the player unlimited continues, along with the ability to shut off the console and continue later on. Even as far back as 1993, continues and saving was common in top-tier games. I will concede Super Mario Bros. Is a short game though, with all 32 levels taking less than an hour to complete for an average skilled gamer. The lack of a continue system is a little more forgivable in a short game versus a multi-hour one. I also appreciate how the non-castle levels all feature checkpoints. Yeah, despite each level being short, there's a checkpoint halfway through, again reducing the amount of time a player spends rehashing previously conquered obstacles. So, as far back as 1985, trial and error difficulty is absent in a massively successful title, and the battery back save version of 1993 was also the second best-selling game on the Super Nintendo. Clearly, difficulty occurring through organic means was rewarded with blockbuster sales. So, what do I mean by organic difficulty? Well, there are two sources of challenge in Super Mario Bros. Being a platformer, this means mastering jumps and dealing with enemies. Now, combat is admittedly not the focus of Super Mario Bros. The early enemies like Goombas, Koopa Troopas, Koopa Paratroopas, and Piranha Plants can usually be avoided by jumping over them or running under them. However, one can also jump on them if they so choose. Simple stuff. However, in World 1-4, the player must contend with the fire bar, lava bubbles, and Bowser's fire attacks. These offer a contrast in enemy type as they cannot be defeated through any means, only avoided. This creates an almost sawtooth-like difficulty balance through the 8 worlds of the Mushroom Kingdom. After the World 1-4 spike in difficulty, World 2-1 takes it down a notch, offering a brief reprieve, but then ramping back up in the next castle challenge. World 2-2 adds the infamous water stage to the adventure. I'm not particularly fond of this level trope. However, it would be copied for at least the next decade before developers started experimenting with alternate control methods. Basically, tapping the action button will cause Mario to rise, and releasing it will cause him to descend. This works well enough, though I find the slow movement does not always match the obstacles at hand. The squid-like blooper enemy always gave me problems as a kid. They seem to be programmed to match Mario's altitude, however their left and right movement appears to be random. This forces the player to actually anticipate the enemy's movement in order to pass by safely. Depending on the environmental blockages, this is sometimes easier said than done. Cheep Cheeps are also introduced in World 2, though their underwater form is hardly threatening. Above the ground, their chaotic flight paths can be tricky to avoid, and they come from below rather than the side of the screen, giving the player a new pattern to learn. World 3 keeps upping the ante with the Hammer Brothers, though I do find it curious their initial introduction features a superstar power-up right before, which can be accessed by either Mario or Super Mario thanks to thoughtful level design. Assuming a new player found the superstar in this conspicuous row of bricks, one could learn the Hammer Brothers' erratic throwing patterns and jumping behavior through the safety of invincibility. Speaking of items, this is another great form of progression found in Super Mario Bros. The protagonist starts life as Mario. A mushroom power-up transforms him into Super Mario, and the fire flower transforms him into Fire Mario. Fire Mario is actually quite powerful, making quick work of many of the lesser enemies in the game. But it isn't game-breaking. As the adventure unfolds, fewer and fewer enemies can be harmed by the fireballs. This includes the Buzzy Beetle, whose hard shell is immune. The same goes for the Bullet Bills, who debut in World 5. They too are immune to fireballs and must either be avoided or jumped on. Additionally, the Fire Flower offers Mario no additional agility, meaning the core focus of the game, jumping and landing, is not made easier. This is the kind of balance I look for with items and power-ups. The Fire Flower is a two-step process to obtain, and one must actively seek them out. They aren't just lying around. Sometimes these are in question blocks, other times hidden in unassuming bricks, and the player has to actively avoid hazards. One misstep will mean returning to Mario form, a seemingly fitting punishment for poor play. The same can be said for the Superstar. The temporary invincibility is extremely powerful, but the player must still navigate platforms, and the power wears off relatively quickly, making seeking them out rewarding but not game-breaking. Even extra lives are often placed in difficult spots, forcing a player to endure risk to obtain a reward. In short, all of the power-ups achieve balance. But back to the difficulty progression. For the most part, each world is more difficult than the one preceding it. The player is tasked with making trickier jumps, navigating denser enemy patterns, while power-ups are presented less frequently. It seems obvious now, but in the arcade games prior to the NES, game difficulty was often increased by faster enemies and successive loops of levels, and might even stop evolving completely at a certain point. Super Mario Bros. Did experiment with flat-out repeating levels, though. World 5-3 is a repeat of 1-3, only Bullet Bills are added to increase the challenge. World 5-4 is a repeat of 2-4, but with additional fire bars added to previously blank spaces. World 7-3 is a repeat of 2-3, but with added Koopa Troopas and Paratroopas. 6-4 is like 1-4, and perhaps there are others I'm missing. On one hand, I can appreciate what the designers were attempting to do, throwing a new challenge the player's way while also providing them with a familiar layout. However, repeating the same level layout twice certainly feels odd in 2018, and is a technique no longer used by game designers. It brings up a good debate about replay value versus padding. The Sonic games of the 2000s were probably the worst offenders in padding out games. For some reason, Sonic Team and even Dimps were afraid of a game being short, presumably fearing critics would fault the games for having full retail prices despite containing only a few hours of gameplay. This resulted in games like Sonic Heroes having to be repeated 4 times, just to unlock the final boss. Same goes for the Sonic Advance titles. While it may have made some sort of sense at the time, playing the games today is far more tedious than it should be. Super Mario Bros. Certainly doesn't pad the adventure out like the aforementioned Sonic games, which is appreciated, but the repeated layouts do age the game a bit. Now, padding should not be mistaken for replay value either. As the term replay implies, value is obtained by replaying the game, meaning coming back for more. This is an area where Super Mario Bros. Excels. First, there are the warp tunnels. At some point, a player will realize they can actually jump into the area occupied by the HUD. The 1-Up mushroom also offers a hint to this area, which will eventually lead to the discovery of a warp room. Seeking these out will ultimately lead players to a quick path through to the end of the game, a great bonus for those who keep replaying the game. This of course leads to speedrunning. Super Mario Bros. Is one of those games where it felt like the designers meticulously placed every platform and enemy in anticipation of the various routes and jumps a player might attempt. Assuring a mistimed enemy is never the punishment for a perfect landing, but this is taken to the extreme with the run button. Mario of course has 2 speeds, a brisk jog when simply pressing the D-pad in the appropriate direction, and a quick run while holding down the action button. This allows for higher and longer leaps, further multiplying the ways a player might traverse a level. Myself, I am not the speedrunning type. However, even I can't help but run during World 2-3 or 4-1. This illustrates a few things to consider. First, the designers actually placed every Cheep Cheep or Spiny in a location the player could avoid when running flat out. Second, it illustrates just how much control the player has. Not just in speed, but in height. Mario is not a floaty character, and releasing the jump button will send the hero downwards rather quickly. This gives the player another way to not only land on tight platforms by adjusting speed, but also in adjusting mid-air trajectory on the fly, which is amazing. I also love how Mario can carry momentum when speeding off ledges, rather than dropping like a brick, again adding to the flow of the levels. Second, the hitbox is incredibly forgiving. Brief brushes against enemies often won't result in touch damage, allowing for a little slop and working in conjunction with the need and desire to keep moving forward. It always bugs me when later games feature odd hitboxes and weird collision programming, because Nintendo already mastered this concept way back in '85. But there are other things which do feel like 1985. The timer in the upper right doesn't fit the game at all. For one, Super Mario Bros. Is filled with secrets, and a player will naturally want to break every brick, check every pipe, and touch every question block to see what lurks within. The timer takes this freedom and natural wonder away from the player, for seemingly no other reason than this is how other games of the time operated. The timer also works against the 3 different mazes located in 3 different castles. Here, the player must choose a path and move forward. If they select the wrong path, that portion of the castle loops and they must choose a different one. However, a player's success is completely random on their first playthrough, with no level cues guiding one in the right direction. A chime was added in the All-Stars version, but as the player cannot backtrack in Super Mario Bros. 1, the chime offers nothing new to players, as the new part of the level already clues one in to their success. The The timer also rushes the player through the Hammer Brothers sections. The Hammer Brothers are easily the most difficult obstacles found in the game. Their movement is random, with the hammer chucking projectile being erratic, as well as their jumping. Now, only one of them is placed in a way where the player's success is based on luck or chance. The rest of the encounters are on flat ground, matching Mario's abilities. Mario's acceleration is quick enough where players can either just run under one and speed off, or get under the Arc of Destruction and safely avoid the projectile. In fact, I found a new appreciation for them in World 7-3. This level contains 2 power-ups, allowing a patient player to obtain both a mushroom and a fire flower for the final gauntlet of Hammer Brothers, which is thoughtful. However, on every single run, I found myself nearing the time limit while I followed the rules of the stage without dawdling. It really is an arbitrary inclusion, adding nothing to the experience. Also silly is the scoring system. This is again just a sign of the times. The player receives points for the most mundane things, like breaking bricks. As the world is filled with bricks and some enemies respawn indefinitely, there is really no reason to even care about the score. If the game focused more on the scoring multiplier of kicking the shell of a Koopa through a line of enemies, this may have been more interesting. Finally, the boss battles are weak. The Hammer Brothers really are the stars of the show here, as Bowser offers virtually no challenge. He can be cheesed with fireballs, one can race under him or over him, and of course, as the game has no knockback and a healthy invincibility period after being hit, simply running through him is a viable strategy. One might discourage this sort of abuse, but I play to win, not earn style points. Besides, this was offered as a legitimate strategy in the previously mentioned Player's Guide. Needless to say, while the castle stages are a nice way to end each of the game's worlds, the boss fight is most definitely not. Moving on, the graphics of the NES original are simplistic. On the small television sets of the 80s, this wasn't really noticeable, but on the massive displays of today, the game does feel empty at times. Mario also looks strange when standing still, with his body facing forward and his head to the side. However, I should give a special shout out to the color palettes used on Mario and the enemies. Due to hardware limitations, sprites can only contain 3 colors, but one would be hard-pressed to even notice this limitation thanks to clever art design. Empty backgrounds, odd sprites, and color limitations are of course eliminated entirely with the All-Stars version. As much as I want to be a purist, it would be impossible to deny the game looks objectively better on the Super Nintendo. Backgrounds are far more detailed with multiple scrolling layers and little negative space. Sprite work is improved with more colors, helping Mario and his foes look more visually appealing. Animated lava and transparent water also bring the overall presentation up a few notches. And man, does Bowser look a ton better with animated arms, rather than a static monster moving about the screen. Flicker is also eliminated, which could occasionally obscure projectile hazards in the original. Don't get me wrong, I love the 8-bit aesthetic of the original game, but the 16-bit graphics simply blow them out of the water. The same could be said for the music. Again, I really dig the simple chiptunes found in the NES cartridge, though there are really only 4 songs: the overworld theme, the underworld theme, the underwater theme, and the castle theme. The All-Stars version expands upon the original thanks to superior hardware and more space. The bonus areas and coin heavens feature new music, and the remaining 4 tracks are greatly expanded upon, with a much wider diversity of instruments and effects like reverb. As for the melodies themselves, it is difficult for me to discern if the music is as good as it is iconic. The music has been with me nearly my whole life, so someone with less nostalgia would be better served analyzing if the music is worthy of the praise it receives. One thing I do appreciate is how sound is used to communicate off-screen action to the player. Sometimes an off-screen shell will ricochet back to the player, however the player can still hear it, eliminating the surprise of its speedy return. Off-screen bullet bills do the same thing, giving an audio cue, assuring a player is never caught by surprise mid-jump. I've also heard many say the controls were tweaked in All-Stars, but playing them back to back, every jump felt identical, so I'm not sure if there's any truth to this at all. The mid-air controls, both in terms of horizontal adjustments or vertical, felt exactly the same. I did feel like there was occasionally a bit of lag causing me to race to my death instead of jump, but this very well could have been fatigue, so who knows. I do find the additional momentum Mario maintains when smashing bricks to be an odd change. In the original, a player could quickly decimate a row of bricks, and hitting one returned him to the ground. This flow is lost in the All-Stars version. However, this change did smooth out other areas, so yeah. As I near the end of this video, I should come to some sort of conclusion. Super Mario Bros. Is a groundbreaking and important title for sure. It represents a shift in game design from the quarter-munching arcade titles before it, and began the journey from video games being a fad to one of the biggest industries in popular culture. However, I think it is also okay to acknowledge it has aged, and I don't just mean visually. The timer and score are relics of the past and serve no purpose. The lack of continues in the NES version forces players to restart after running out of lives, instead of allowing a player to continue to learn the hazard they were having trouble with. The repeated level layouts basically expand the game out another world, but the game would work just as well if excluded. The boss battles are also lackluster, shallow, and repetitive. On the flip side, if I were to explain game mechanics and design decisions with phrases like good difficulty progression, unlimited continues, balanced power-ups, forgiving collision, meaningful replay value, and liberal checkpoints, one might assume I'm describing some modern adventure, but I'm not. I'm describing a title released in 1985. Now, I apologize for being a bit combative in this video, but I must reject the notion that certain design flaws should be forgiven in older games. I also reject the notion that game-breaking power-ups should be showered upon players in modern games. Good game design is timeless. It is okay to question surprise enemy placement. It is okay to criticize poor collision detection. It is okay to expect power-ups and items to be balanced. No game, be it old or new, should somehow be excused from critique based on the year it was released. This is a philosophy I just cannot get behind. For all of its shortcomings, of which there are many, what I appreciate most about Super Mario Bros. Is just how modern it feels today. The game isn't hard by any stretch, but outside of warp tubes, a player really does have to tackle the obstacles at hand. There are no crutches for newcomers to lean on in the name of accessibility. The accessibility comes from tight controls, thoughtful level design, and meticulous item placement. These are traits gamers of all skill levels can appreciate. Super Mario Bros. Doesn't waste a player's time either, with plenty of checkpoints and unlimited continues in the All-Stars version. These are not game design decisions limited to modern titles, but have been with console gaming for decades. And in this sense, I find Super Mario Bros. To be rather remarkable. No nostalgia goggles are needed to enjoy it. One doesn't have to make special excuses about its age when reviewing it. Is Super Mario Bros. The best platformer ever made? No, but it is still pretty damn good.